Welcome to another episode of Afikra Movie Night. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today with us, we have the film director of Our River, Our Sky, Maysoon Pachachi. Maysoon is a London-based filmmaker of Iraqi origin who has worked for many years as a documentary film, TV drama, and feature film editor in the UK. Today we're discussing, as I mentioned, her first fiction feature film as director, Our River, Our Sky, which was shot in Iraq in 2019. The project was awarded the IWC Gulf Filmmaker Award at the Dubai International Film Festival in December 2012 and Best Ensemble Performance from the British Independent Film Awards in 2022. Maysoon also co-founded the Independent Film and Television College, which is a free-of-charge film training center in Baghdad, which ran for 10 years and whose students produced 18 short documentary films, which were shown internationally and received 14 festival prizes. It is an honor to have you on our program, Maysoon. Welcome to Afikra.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I'm very happy to be here.
This film that we're talking about, it's really interesting. Somebody who's had a career as long as yours to sort of venture into the world of features and fiction at the stage in your career that you did. Was that an exciting venture or a scary venture or a combination?
Yeah, it was both. It was definitely both. I just decided there's a way in which fiction can somehow get beneath the surface of things and create a kind of intimacy, which is more difficult with documentary films. But I'd made quite a few documentary films by that time, and this was a film that I had to make. And so I just pitched into it. I mean, what was the hardest thing for me about it really was the fact that it's all the bureaucracy that goes with making a full-length feature film, co-production. And so all that was difficult. And raising the money took something like 7-8 years, for example. And it's not an expensive film, it's quite a small film in a way. So all of that was quite different. Whereas the documentary films, largely, especially the later ones, it was just me and my camera and a microphone.
I was reading your bio, and it says you studied philosophy at UCL in London, and then later went into filmmaking. If I had been speaking to the sort of 20-year-old Maysoon at UCL, would you have said to me, yeah, I'm kind of going through the motions finishing this philosophy degree, but what I really want to do is film, or you had no idea?
Well, what happened was this. I mean, I was, my dad was at the UN for a long time. And so I did all my high school in New York. Then they got transferred back to Baghdad, and I did my first year of college in the States. And I came across a book called A Montage of Theories. And it was just a lot of interviews with filmmakers. So I thought to myself, this is it. This is it. This is what I really want to do. And so on my weekends off, I used to go back to New York and go to the UN library and see what film schools were available around the world. I wanted also to get out of the States at that point. I just wanted a change, to be living somewhere else. And I came to London, and I found myself in a postgraduate seminar, which I was not. I mean, I wasn't postgraduate. I wasn't graduate even. Run by a man called Thorold Dickinson, who was a quite left-wing filmmaker, director in the 1940s in this country, in Britain, and he just showed a lot of films. That wasn't a practical course. But we saw an incredible number of films from the very early days of cinema till the French New Wave, till Italian neorealism. And I saw films I'd never seen before, Japanese, Indian films, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my first training. So on my Christmas holiday, I went back to Baghdad to see my parents. And my dad said to me, what are you doing? You did very well in high school. You were doing well in college. You need to get a proper academic degree. And I was too sort of unsure of myself at that time. And I went back to London, and I went into the philosophy department of UCL. And the place that I had been seeing the films was at UCL as well, at the Slade School of Art. And had a sort of what turned out to be a sort of 2-hour conversation with the head of the department. And he said to me, "Are you going to apply here?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't think so." And he said, "Well, if you are, I think we can probably offer you a place." And so that's what I did. But I spent a lot of my time in the philosophy department doing agit-prop street theater. So, and sneaking off to see the films that were being shown at the Slade School of Art. So I knew I wanted to make films from that time. Yeah. And I was sort of 19, 20 exactly at that time. Yeah.
What sort of impact does being the child of a diplomat have on your perspective, especially the child of a diplomat of a country that's sort of embroiled in turmoil, much because of international politics? Mm-hmm. I imagine that it's like has a very complicated effect on you, and one that's probably still unraveling. But that young student sitting in that chair at UCL, was that young student primarily interested in stories from and of and about Iraq, or were you sort of detaching?
That sort of crystallized for me. The sort of focus on Iraq crystallized for me during the 91 Gulf War, because like all the other Iraqis in London, I was sat glued to the TV 24 hours a day. And I saw that you never saw one ordinary Iraqi person on the screen in all those thousands of hours of media coverage. And I thought it was like the country, and it's like the country was empty, and it felt like the whole place was being effaced off the map kind of thing. And I was quite traumatized by that. I mean, to the extent of I forgot my name. I forgot how old. I couldn't figure out how old I was. Was I 16 or 46 or what? And eventually, out of that, I found myself making a film about Iraqi women in exile who were living here in London, from different ages, different class backgrounds, different religions, and all that kind of thing. And so I made a documentary. That was my first documentary film, and it's basically a series of interviews with women who had stories to tell, who had been waiting for 30 years to tell them, basically, and a lot of archive footage. And it was a film for Channel 4 here in this country, and that was the beginning of it. But it came out of a kind of trauma, and it was and I sort of understood that in a way, sometimes you remake in art of whatever kind something that's been shattered in real life. So that started me on my way.
Yeah. What effect did it have on coping with the shatter? I mean, was it just like, did it feel like an effective tool to, not to be glib, but to remember your name, so to speak?
Yeah. It did. It gave me a sense of, well, I can do this. I can do, this is what I can do. And so, I stayed involved with Iraq from that point on. And not all the films I made subsequently were about Iraq at all. But I became part of co-founded a group with Nadia Al-Ali, who's a professor at SOAS at the time. And it was a women's group, women, Iraqi and non-Iraqi women based in Britain. It was a group against the sanctions. I campaigned against the sanctions and against the war in Iraq. So slowly, bit by bit, I got sort of more and more absorbed into the business of Iraq. And I hadn't been growing up particularly, except that it was always on the fringes of our lives, because my dad was representing Iraq at the UN, for example. And so every upheaval and tremor came home to us, but we were living far away from it.
Yeah. And so the period of time we're talking about are in the sort of the 90s during the first and second Gulf War.
That was right? The 91 Gulf War was what started me on my way. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious sort of like longitudinally, but also geographically. What were the differences in public reception to your work if you look at the UK in the 90s the US in the 90s, and then sort of the UK and the US in the 21st century. Are there, discernible differences in terms of public interest in understanding these nuanced stories that you're willing to present that don't look like just CNN images of bombs from airplanes from 30,000 feet?
Yeah, well, it here, I found it very difficult here in the UK. I was quite on the margins. The films that I wanted to make didn't seem to be films that anybody was that interested in. But I went ahead anyway. And actually, some of my documentaries were funded by German and French TV, like Arte and ZDF, for example, but not here. And in the States, they got a showing of one of my films, which was a sort of slightly spaced out documentary road movie with a woman who drove a bus in Iran, from Tehran to Bandar Abbas. It's a 24-hour journey. And I made that film for Arte and ZDF, and it was a really enjoyable film to make. It was about women, basically, in Iran. That got a certain amount of distribution in the States, and did quite well, and was seen in colleges, really mostly, than cinemas. And I made a film in 2004 when I returned to Iraq for the first time in 35 years, and shot a film. And my dad had gone back at the age of 80 to try to sort of do something, which he subsequently really wasn't able to do. But that film was also shown on Arte and ZDF, and it was shown in a couple of cinemas in New York. So I've had that kind of stuff. So in a way, I've had more reception, and in the reaction to Our River, Our Sky, to the screenings that it's had in the States, have been really, really positive and very engaged. People. The film has been shown, for example, at several colleges, and at one of them, for example, some of the students wrote essays, and they sent me lists of questions, and it opened up a dialogue between us, and it was great. So now it's finally going to be distributed in this country in September. But we have a special screening on the 10th of March, which is the 20th anniversary of the invasion, here in London. So it'll get a bit more traction that way. But this is not a very film for me. What I find, it's not a very, very film friendly situation.
Yeah, you had mentioned, maybe before we actually talk about it more, if you can set the scene. So the film takes place in what I remember as 2006 Iraq. Mm-hmm. For those listening, the invasion of Iraq started in 2003, if I remember correctly.
The invasion, that's right, 2003, yeah.
Yeah. So 2006, so this is a few years into that strife. And there is a very specific set of circumstances. So if you can just set the scene a little bit, Maysoon, for our listeners, and then we're going to listen to the trailer.
Yeah, okay. Well, 2006, the country was still under U.S. occupation, and but there was it was a time of intense sectarian violence. Suddenly, there were these sectarian between two branches of Islam, basically, and neighborhoods began being divided from each other. It's a very pluralistic society, Iraq, and there was an incredible splitting that was going on. And this, one of the major incidents that triggered the kind of intense violence and barbaric violence that was going on between the sects was that there was a very important Shia shrine in the south of the country that was bombed by Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who had taken grip of everything. And so that made for a very strong reaction between people. And so you got a situation where people who'd been neighbors for decades, who came from different different religions or different that were no longer really able to meet, you know. And for example, I have friends who, you know, a couple, the man is Shia, the woman was Sunni, and they had children, and there was nowhere they could actually live together, because, you know, this area now became completely Shia, this area became Sunni, and there were checkpoints that were, and it was just a hideous time. And I just decided, and I was I wasn't there in 2006, but I was very much in touch with the students of our college who were there, and I was hearing their experiences, and through the women's group also hearing what was going on. And I just thought, how are people living through this? How do they find the courage every morning to get out of bed and renew a fragile sense of hope that gets them out the door and gets their kids to school and so forth? How can they live any kind of normality? And I wanted to sort of explain that to people, because the Iraqi people have gone through trauma after trauma after trauma, including 35 years of dictatorship and so forth. And nobody's had time to kind of repair or heal or anything. And it's in that context that this suddenly, it's as if the world outside you and inside you, because it's shattering inside, is shattering. I often say that what it was like is if you were holding a mirror in your hands, and it slips from your hands and it shatters into 1,000 pieces. And if you're very lucky and you don't lose any of the pieces, you can maybe reconstruct the shape of the original mirror. But now it's fractured, and the fractures show. And that was the image that led me. So the film is kind of an act of repair in some way.
Yeah, and even if you do repair, the image that you're left with of yourself is one with cracks.
Well, exactly. And and the other thing to say about it, its form is a bit unusual. And this was part of the difficulty in getting funding for it, because it's not a singular story about a central character and a central story that all the other characters or incidents feed. You know, there isn't that kind of hierarchy. Everybody is at the center of their story. So it's a film of intersecting stories, intersecting individual stories that plays out over the last week of 2006. And in the end, you get a kind of collective picture. It's a bit like a Persian miniature. Sometimes you see a Persian miniature, for example, of a market. And in every corner of the picture space, you see a different story going on. You know, in the center, there are two merchants arguing about something, but over here, there's a woman with her baby, and over here, there's another story, and over here, there are lovers, and all of it becomes the portrait, in a way, depiction of that time and place. Well, my film is like that, basically. That was one of the inspirations.
Yeah, beautiful. It's interesting as you were describing it. I was just looking at the poster, which I have on the screen for those who are listening to the podcast who can't see it. And the artwork itself is also in fragments with cracks and different storylines and overlapping ideas and unfinished frames. And it's speaks to that idea quite effectively. Let's watch the trailer, which is on YouTube. For those who want to look it up, you can look up Our River, and then there are 3 ellipses and Our Sky. So let's listen to it, and then we will talk more.
لازم نتعلم.
ريما يلا لحيروح.
جايين نور جايين.
اكو شيء ابو حيدر؟
نعم.
اكو شيء؟
كل شيء ماكو.
بس أنا أبد ما أترك العراق.
You know, that last line, Maysoon, is haunting for me. Because, you know, I was just talking to somebody, I'm in Beirut, and I was just talking to somebody who, this guy who used to work in the army. He was an officer. And now he's working with his family on a farm, and he's barely making any money. I mean, he makes the equivalent of a monthly. He makes 3 million lira, which used to be $2,000, and now is $50 a month. And he was saying this idea of like, there's no way I can leave. Like, no matter what, I can't leave. Not I won't leave. I can't leave. And it's a haunting, it's like at once this idea of being shackled and being stuck, but also like not wanting to give up. How much of, you know, like that intention that this woman communicates, do you feel like that's a uniform feeling across the board at that time? Or is it, you know, more complicated than that? And some people don't feel that sense of persistence and, you know, I don't know what the word is, honestly. I mean, for me, that's so heartbreaking hearing her say that. It doesn't fill me with hope or pride. It fills me with sadness, to be honest.
Well, I think, I mean, among the people that I know, there are quite a few people, including my co-writer. I mean, these are things I introduced into the film, but including my co-writer, who has a young daughter, had a young daughter who's now grown up. That was her, that, you know, she, at one point, I remember when we were working on a documentary where I met her, Irada Jabouri. And it was that was happening at the same time. It was 2006-07 that project was going on. It was a Iraqi women's photographic project that was going on in Syria, and I made a film about it. You know, I remember one of the Syrian women saying to her, you know, why don't you leave? Why don't you just leave, you know? And she said, I won't leave. I won't leave. And partly the dialogue in the film, where the scene where Sarah's talking to her brother, and she sort of says, if I go live outside Iraq, I'll die. And she says, you know, this is our sky, it's our river, it's our, you know, it's that sense of this is me, this is where I belong. And there's also a sense that if we leave, if people like us who have you know, certain ideas to give and have talents to give to the country. If people like us leave, then who are we leaving the country to? You know, corrupt politicians who just lining their pockets, you know, and militias and so forth. And so they won't leave. You know, I found that among a lot of people. And some people had to leave, but they were forced to leave for, you know, they had to leave. I have a friend who went, and she finally got to Sweden and so forth. And she stayed there. And the minute she was able to, she came back. But she had to leave because her child was in danger. But I don't think a lot of people left willingly.
Yeah.
I really don't. And they have a sort of connection to I mean, there are people in Iraq who have, you know, come hell or high water, this is our country.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Why 2006 and specifically? Because it's not like you made the film in 2007 and, you know, the idea happened and you know, sort of the plot came together and you thought, all right, well, I'm just going to do it today, you know, in today's Iraq. As you alluded to, you know, it took 8 years or 7 years of finding the financing and getting it out the door. Why 2006 specifically?
Because that was a particularly intense period in terms of sectarian violence and civil war that was going on. It was 2006-7. That period was very, very, and it was also the year that Saddam was executed. Which actually didn't change anything. But so it had a lot of, and it was also a year in which, as it happened, the Eid and Christmas kind of coincided, which was important. So I chose it because it was when I was making the film in Damascus. I could see the effects. I mean, the women who'd come from Iraq to join in this photographic project made life maps, big charts of their life, and they with lifelines, and told their story in front of the other participants. And I could see that everybody was listening not with their ears but with their own story, in a sense. But we were in the middle of a very difficult time. I mean, we were in Damascus; nothing was happening there for the Iraqis, but they had just come out of there, and the stories they told about that time, 2006. So I was very, I just thought, well, this is, I don't know, it seemed like the right time to make it, really.
Yeah. You were mentioning this idea of the way the wars have been covered in the West, and what sort of starts as a single story turns into a very singular story. Mm-hmm. And sort of dominates our people's understanding of what this place looks like, and sort of blurs people's faces and the humanity of people on the ground. I'm really curious about, how do you feel like people understand what's happening in Iraq inside the Arab world itself? I mean, the Arab world is not a single place, and it's very complicated, but I feel like, for me, I'm amazed at how ignorant I am constantly. I mean, maybe I should stop being amazed. I should get the picture. But I'm amazed at how little I really know about what's happening so close to me. I mean, in Syria and Iraq, it's amazing how little I really know about what's actually happening, and the nuances of what's happening.
Yeah, it is very difficult because it's covered in terms of the media in the Arab world and outside the Arab world in a kind of reasonably superficial way. It's not, you don't. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, I think you're right. It's and certainly outside the Arab world, when this film has been shown, this film was shown in Cairo, for example, and there were people who came and stayed afterwards and talked, and it was a mixed audience of Egyptians and Iraqis who happened to be living in Cairo. But it was interesting because there was a real sort of, oh, it's like that. Oh, I never imagined it. I never imagined Iraq was like that. And there's an idea of, and the people, are the people really like that? It's not just the situation. It is like sort of, Iraqis are sort of in their being violent people or something like that. I mean, there's all kinds of stereotypes.
Yeah.
So I can imagine. It's like, it was interesting here when we had a screening at the Rain Dance Film Festival, which was a mixed audience of Iraqis, who I didn't expect to be there, but Iraqis and British people who were not Iraqi. And it was a very interesting exchange because some of the people who were Iraqi origin who were sitting there were going, I remember this time so well. I mean, my dad died in this period. This, that, the other happened. And the British people were sort of listening. And it was like, and I was standing, on the stage doing the sort of Q&A, and I could see amongst the audience here, there was, because here it's like, well, the fighting stopped. What's the problem? It's like there's an idea that these places are endemically sort of violent and dysfunctional, in the Arab world.
I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the film, and what sort of references or films you use as inspiration. Because this idea of intersecting stories and no single, sort of single protagonist. And when you were coming up with the idea, were there specific films that you were sort of referencing and thinking to yourself, this is actually a form that can work? And I love the way this film did this and sort of treated this this series of many different storylines.
Well, it's going to sound funny because in feel, it's the opposite of my film or the situation. But the rules of the game, les règles du jeu, of Jean Renoir, was something that I saw when I was 19, when I first came here. And I was completely taken with the film because of it. It's a lot of that was a lot of intersecting stories unfolding in a sort of aristocratic country house over a weekend, where there was all kinds of different stories going on between the different people, and you kept moving around from story to story and coming back to it. And there's stuff that was going on between the invited guests, and then there was the servants and so forth. And there was something about it. I loved the fact that it was a collective film that was all going on the same way. And I think that lodged with me, that film. It's also to do with living in big cities, which I've done most of my life. And there you're aware, you go on the subway and there's, I don't know, 100 other people sitting on the subway. And you're sitting there and you start to wonder about other people's lives. You're waiting to cross the street and there's a whole bunch of people with you. And somebody makes a gesture and you get a sort of inkling of that person's life. And this happens in cities a lot. And it's something I've always been interested in, to be out amongst people.
Yeah.
And the idea that my story, my 3-act structure, or whatever it is, my 3-act life is being lived in the context of everybody else's. And I think particularly in the situation that I was trying to describe in Iraq that time, when external circumstances are very strong and they impact on everybody, albeit in different ways, but everybody's affected by it, then you're very aware of living your life in the context of everybody else. Whereas when you're in a more settled place, you're just concerned with your own story or your family or your friends, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that form really, that was my curiosity. Who is everybody?
Yeah. And insofar as I want to go back to this idea of the length that it took to make and actualize the entire film, because I feel like if I were in your position, my relationship to these characters and my understanding of who these characters, quote unquote, are, as you said, like, who is everybody, right? Mm-hmm. I would imagine that understanding is dynamic and fluid and actually and tenuous and fragile. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine you sitting in the back of the screenings at these different festivals that you go to, these characters, I would imagine, are reintroduced to you constantly. And has your understanding of their realities and their desires and challenges changed over time as you've gotten more distance from 2006?
I don't think my understanding has changed, but I think my closeness to these characters has increased. I sort of, people say to me, "Who's your favorite character?" It's a not sort of non-question, and it's. I feel I see them clearer. I feel I see them because they were ideas to begin with. I mean, they're kind of embodied now on the screen. And especially when I'm sitting in this screening where there are other people watching it, I can feel the sort of reaction. So I would say that's the development of it. It's not, I don't suddenly see them in a completely new light. I don't, And then, of course, there are characters that have gone by the board because I had to cut the film. I had to cut the script down in order to be able to make it.
Yeah.
And that's grief. I have grief about that. But but it's an interesting idea that yes, that it's a sort of it's a fluid thing, and your relationship to them may change. Does change.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, you are certainly changing over time, and so your relationship to memories of those, not the memories of that reality, but the memories of your memories of how you perceive that stuff at the time, changes, especially when it's something as emotional and complicated as remembering a time with such violence. A lot has changed in Iraq since 2006, but in some ways, maybe not much. Do you feel like the movie has sort of new meaning in 2023?
I think it may do. Yes, I think it may do, because I think it's not, I wasn't really focused or interested in, the perpetration of violence and showing a lot of blood on the streets and all the rest of it. It was with the people. So I think it's with people's daily lives, and I think, which is what I'm interested in. And I think it's not what happens to you, but what you do with it, how this kind of sense of resistance and sumud, in a way, steadfastness, actually carries through. So I think it's, yes, a lot has changed in a way. The biggest thing that happened, I think, is the uprising in 2019, which was quite similar to what went on in Lebanon, initially started by young people in Tishrin in October. And it was extraordinary because it became a complete population involvement. All kinds of people joined in, people who lived in the countries and came to the cities, children, grandparents, women, men, everybody, doctors, lawyers, artists of all kind. And that was an extraordinarily positive thing to happen. And that energy is still there. I was in Iraq in March of last year, so almost a year ago. And the creative energy among the young people was extraordinary. I did 2 workshops, one in Baghdad and one in Mosul. And Mosul went through hell, with ISIS and everything like that. But the energy to make new and to create new things and to change things was astonishing. So that's, the change that I noticed that had happened. Yeah.
Can I ask you about one of the school that you co-founded? So it's a free school dedicated to documentary filmmaking and supporting local Iraqi aspiring filmmakers. Do I have that part correct?
Yes, it was. It's closed. We kept it going for 10 years. And it was open to everybody. We were, the background of that is that Qasim Abed, who was my partner in this project, we both did quite a lot of teaching in Palestine, in Ramallah and Jerusalem and Gaza. And in 2003, we were sitting in Ramallah in a cafe going, okay, so it's happened. So what are we going to do? And we weren't, we're not doctors or engineers or anything useful. We're just filmmakers. And so we decided to start this place. And Qasim went back to see his family. And we asked if people might be interested in this, because a lot of Iraqis who'd been living outside went back to Baghdad and decided to tell the people who'd been living through all this stuff how they should do things. And we just, or what they needed. And we decided that was really not the way to go. It's just find out was there. And so we set it up in 2004. Yeah. And it was free of charge because nobody had money. And we got a few grants to sort of, and it was very, and it's called a film school. It was actually 2 rooms in a flat with a couple of computers and 2 or 3 cameras maximum. And we used to and we couldn't go out into the streets for a while because it was dangerous, because Al-Qaeda was around. And so at one point there was a bomb that went off sort of near us, and the glass shattered inside the building and all this sort of business. But and at times students couldn't get in because their areas were under siege and so forth. But it was it carried on for quite a while, and they were brave. I mean, they just pitched in, and sometimes they would work for a long time doing research for a little documentary film, and everybody was set up, and then suddenly somebody would get killed, or something would happen in that area, and so they'd have to completely rethink. So it was good.
Can you give us a sense of the types of the subject matter? I mean, 18 films is a lot. Can you give us a sense of what were some of the topics and ideas that some of these students were thinking through?
Well, there was one guy who comes from the Mandai community, and he made a film, for example, about his family having to leave and go to Syria. That was one. There was a guy who made a film about the Shabender Cafe, which is in Mutanabbi Street. Mutanabbi Street is the street of booksellers in Baghdad. And there's a very famous cafe there, which has been there since 1918, I think, which is a sort of literary cafe, and it's always packed with people. And all of that was blown up in 2007. So he had just before that, this guy had gone to make a thing about this, and this was a boy whose house had been hit by a bomb as well, and he came out, and he was he'd filmed his stuff, and at that point people were being kidnapped all over the place, and some people jumped out of a car and grabbed his camera off him, and he sort of held on to it, and they shot him in the leg, and he just lay on the pavement bleeding for a while. They went away. Nobody dared come near him. Finally, a woman ran into the street and got a cab and was taken to hospital and everything. Finally, he recovered, and he went on to he made that film. But his fellow students, we did the editing of that particular course. We did that in Damascus, actually, and his people who were in the course with him finished the film for him, because at that point he was in hospital. He recovered, and he made a film about journalists in Iraq, journalists trying to sort of, because a lot had been wounded and so forth, and so he made quite a good film about that. Some people a guy made a film about widows, what happens to a widow. Karbala. There was another guy who made a film about music in Syria.
Amazing.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Before we move on to the films of note section that we do for a movie night, I just want to ask you about the production of Our River, Our Sky. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the crew, and you shot between Syria and Iraq, correct?
No,
okay.
We didn't shoot in Syria. We shot the whole thing in Iraq.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about what that actually looked like. We have a question in the chat from Basima, which is, what challenges did you face when asking women to tell their stories, especially in the period of sectarian violence in Iraq? Did you face any risk being in Iraq, again, with Al-Qaeda's presence? So, I mean, that coupled with just the operational challenges of producing a film in a place with so much violence. What do you remember from those days?
Well, the film that she's referring to about women telling their stories, that was made here in London. That wasn't made in Iraq. It was about Iraq, and they had to be very careful because their families were still back in Iraq. And so if they were critical of the government, their families would get, might be affected, might be arrested or something. So that's that film. By the time in 2019, it wasn't ISIS had been defeated for the time being, and so we shot part of the film, the scenes, a lot of the interior scenes, and the scenes on the street, where most of this in the neighborhood, that was shot in Slemaniya in Kurdistan, and we were very lucky. We found a street that resembled Baghdad, because the whole thing is set in Baghdad, resembled Baghdad because in the 1960s there was a program to give government employees a loan from the government bank, a plot of land and a loan from the government bank to build a house. And there were 5 different designs of houses, and you could choose the kind of house you wanted to build, and you would build the house. And once the house was built, you were given a pomegranate tree, an orange tree, and a palm tree to put in your garden. And then you had to pay the So there are lots of areas in different cities in Baghdad, in Iraq, who have look the same. So that was a street that we shot on. And we shot there for 3 weeks with a variety of people. And in terms of logistics, we had a lot of support from a local production company. And the actors had to get, some of them were Iraqi, most of them were Iraqi, but a lot of them based outside the country, in Sweden, for example, in Germany. And so and in the UK, they were coming and going to do their roles. The last part of the film was shot in Baghdad itself. Okay. And we got to Baghdad, and a lot of it is focused on the river, as you've seen. That was great. I was very happy to be in Baghdad because it's the city I know best. And my grandparents used to have a house on the river, so I'm very close to the river. But we got there, and the police came up to us, and they said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" We said, "We're making a film, etc. We have some scenes here by the river." They said, "Look at the river. Look how high it is. They'd had tremendous rainstorms up north, and so they'd opened up the dams so it wouldn't flood. And they said, we won't let you go out onto the river." And I said, "Well, it's crucial. It's absolutely crucial. We have to." And they said, "No, it's too dangerous." So we went through a bit of all that, and finally the river subsided a bit, and we got to do what we needed to do there. So we didn't have any problems, actually.
That's great.
We didn't have any harassment. There was only one scene where there's a guy running down a very battered street. The taxi driver guy that runs down a very battered street. And the first assistant director said to me, "You sit in the car. You just go out of sight, sit over there." And I said, "Why? It's me. I have to direct." He said, "No, this is full of drug dealers and militias, and just don't be here." And so I got grumpy and went and sat in the car. And our DOP was British, very experienced in shooting all over the world, and very experienced in dealing with and diffusing difficult situations. So he was great, and he fell in love with Baghdad big time. It was extraordinary. And he was told on that, "Don't put up a tripod. Don't, the boom has got to be over there, out of sight, and we shoot these shots, and then we just get out of here." So,
interesting.
Yeah, but we didn't have any aggravation. Everybody thinks that, there was, there might have been bombs or whatever. There wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
The last question I want to ask you before we move to the films of note, actually, is when an audience sees this film, do you have a specific thing that you hope that they walk away with? Is there a message that you hope that they take away from watching the film?
I guess that just a sharper awareness of the fallout of wars. People tend to concentrate on the shooting and so forth, but actually what's going on inside people and how they're trying to live a life despite everything that's happening. One reaction that I got from somebody who saw it in the States said to me, we thought, "God, what would I do if I were in that position? What would I do? Would I stay? Would I go?" What would I do if I was the taxi driver being threatened? And that pleased me a lot, because I mean that's the point. I mean, the thing is, I was really desperate to show people as not as victims, because if you get anybody talking about the Iraqis or the Syrians, it's as victims, just. And I wasn't really interested in that, and so that's relation that to understand actually the human cost of it all, and how people, and resilience and resistance, what people do to keep themselves going.
Yeah. Oh, I think that comes across for sure. Okay, let's do the films of note. These are 4 films. For every movie night episode, we ask our guests to pick a few films that we think that they think people should check out. So the first category is the film that most influenced your film. You mentioned it already, but tell our listeners what it is.
The Rules of the Game. It's a film by Jean Renoir, and it's also a collective story about a lot of people who come to stay for a weekend in a sort of aristocratic country house. And there's all kinds of stories being unraveled there that you see. And it's a film without a central character. At the end of it, you're thinking, well, who's the central character? And the central character, in a way, is somebody who's quite marginal. And so that certainly influenced my film in terms of thinking of telling a collective story and telling a story of intersecting stories.
Wasn't it remade as well? This movie?
I don't know. I haven't seen a remake of it.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Okay, let's go to the second one. The next one is the film that always makes you laugh.
Well, most things by Jacques Tati. I like Playtime a lot. It's really a bonkers film. You know, you come out of it and you're like, the whole world has sort of changed. It's gone very weird and chaotic. It's very funny. It's very sharp. It's critical of all kinds of things. And I like, of his films, I like this one, and I like Mon Oncle, My Uncle, which is a bit close to Charlie Chaplin in modern times. It's just when the machinery, all the kind of gadgets and stuff that we live with suddenly go wrong. And it's very funny, you know. But Playtime, I think, is very funny. It's a great film. Do you like it?
I've never seen it, so
see it. It's
I
really
will.
Crazy.
I ask these questions just so I can expand my queue of
films to see.
Films to see. Okay, the film that you rewatch all the time.
Yes, it's the story of Apu, and it's part of a trilogy by Satyajit Ray, Indian filmmaker, wonderful, very humane filmmaker. And this is the third part. It's the sort of concluding thing. It's the story, and it starts with this person, Apu, as a young boy with his sister in a village. That's the first chapter in the trilogy. And then we catch him as he's sort of on the cusp of adolescence in Benares. They've moved. And then this is when he's older and he marries. It's a complicated story, but he's sort of, a friend of his is betrothed to somebody and is to marry. To marry somebody. And it turns out that the person that has been chosen for the woman to marry actually is not all there, and she refuses to marry him and so forth. And it's impossible. It's aib. And all this. And so he decides to step in and marry this woman, and he does. And it's their story, and it's very touching. It's very beautiful, I think. There's a scene in it that I particularly like when they sort of they're back in it's their first flat together. They're together, and she's up cooking, and he just wakes up and he finds a bit of her hair on the pillow. And I don't know. It's a wonderful film.
Amazing. And the last one is a film that is most beautifully shot.
Sancho Dayu. Yeah, this is by Kenji Mitsuguchi, whose films I love, Japanese filmmaker. And this is about a sort of an official he gets banished. His family gets banished, and so the mother, the wife, and the two children get banished as a boy and a girl, and they are separated by bandits. The woman is kidnapped, and the kids are sort of left. They're lost, and we follow their lives, and it's incredibly stirring, beautiful stuff. There's a scene in it where the daughter wades into the water, which ripples around her. I think when she's given up all hope of everything, of ever finding her mother.
Amazing.
It is. Have you seen this film?
No, I haven't.
See it. It's really good. Have you seen? The first film of his I saw was called Ugetsu Monogatari, which means something like ghost story.
No, I haven't seen that either. I have to.
That is, I mean, they're stunning films. They're stunning.
Yeah.
Films. Yeah.
The list of films from Japan that I've seen is embarrassingly short. So I have to spend some time doing that.
Well, you're young yet. That's why.
No, I think, I have to make time because I'm excited about it, and it looks really, really cool. Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to wrap up by just telling people where they can find more information about the film. So on our screen here, I have the Twitter account, A River, Our Sky, which is easy to find on Twitter. But Maysoon, where can people actually watch this? I mean, let's say we have a listener right now who's in Spain or in California or in Marrakesh or Beirut or London. Where can people get their hands on the film?
At the moment, it's not really available. It will be released in this country in September.
Okay.
We've only got a distributor. We have a sales agent. I mean, if somebody wants to show it, for example, in a college or something like that, or a community event, there is a sales agent that I can put them in touch with in France, who would arrange that.
Okay.
So I don't know. I suppose if you give my email, I can.
Well, you can go to the website riverskyfilm.com.
Yeah.
And then that's the easiest way, I think, to connect with you. Maysoon, thanks so much for taking time to do this. I think it's a really beautiful work, and I'm excited that it's a part of Afikra Movie Night.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on to it. It's great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you.